Before we begin today's episode, two quick requests. First, if you value thoughtful, honest conversations about the Orthodox world, subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. You'll get frequent essays, episode notes, and occasional behind-the-scenes reflections that expand on what you hear on this podcast. It's free to join, and if you choose a paid plan, you directly support independent Jewish media and help me keep producing these conversations. Take 10 seconds right now to search for Orthodox Conundrum Commentary on Substack and hit subscribe, or click on the link in the description of this podcast. While you're there, check out my latest article entitled Mamdani, the Jews, and My Personal Confusion. Thank you for being part of this community and helping us grow. Second, I recommend that you listen to our newest episode of Intimate Judaism entitled Talking About Sex at School. How can Jewish educators guide teens through questions about bodies, desire, and values without shame or fear? Tali Rosenbaum and I sat down with Shuli Taubes to discuss why high school education about sex and sexual ethics matters, what healthy frameworks look like, and how schools can partner with parents to raise confident, thoughtful, and compassionate young adults. Make sure to look for that and all episodes of Intimate Judaism wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on to today's episode of the Orthodox Conundrum Podcast with the CEO and National Director of the Anti Defamation League, Jonathan Greenblatt.
I mean, this is, again, the biggest fraud of them all and the most easily disproven, Scott. If you didn't believe that the nation of Pakistan doesn't have the right to exist, as well as the nation of Great Britain with the cross on the flag, if you felt that none of those countries had the right to exist, then I wouldn't have a problem when you say that you have issues with Israel. But it is the moral selectivity. It is the moral incoherence that I have a problem with. Because as Natan Sharansky famously said, the 3D test: do you demonize Israelis and the state? Do you delegitimize it and its right to exist? And then you hold it to double standards. And I think anti-Zionism as this nihilist ideology specializes in and has perfected the double standard.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Orthodox Conundrum. This is the Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. The past few weeks have seen a dramatic increase in the mainstreaming of anti-Semitic figures on both the left and the right in the United States. Most obviously, Zohran Mamdani's victory in the New York City mayoral election demonstrates that his anti-Zionist views are not an impediment to electoral success. And perhaps more ominously, there's the possibility that his anti-Zionism actually helped propel him to victory. Meanwhile, on the right, Tucker Carlson platformed and broadcast a softball interview with Nick Fuentes, a Holocaust denier and open admirer of both Hitler and Stalin. And while many Republicans have denounced the attempt to mainstream such views, many others have kept quiet or, worse, refused to denounce them, instead emphasizing that infighting is counterproductive, even if that means accepting the viewpoints of someone who openly asserts that Jews don't have a place in Western civilization, and worse. To better understand what's going on and how we can effectively confront it, I was honored to speak with Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO and National Director of the Anti Defamation League. We talked about why anti-Zionism is almost always anti-Semitism, and why this characterization applies to Mamdani. What should concern Jewish people about Mayor Mamdani? The issue of anti-Semitism on campuses, and why some college presidents who are not anti-Semitic end up defending the indefensible. The most effective ways to combat anti-Semitism on both the left and the right, and the mistakes that the Jewish community has made along the way. How he addresses complaints about the ADL from people like FBI Director Kash Patel and the National Education Association, and much more. It's an important, informative, and timely conversation, and I hope that it will engender serious discussion among Jewish people, both in the U.S. and around the world. We'll get to that conversation in a moment. First, remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate it and write a review. Continue the conversation on Facebook by joining the Orthodox Conundrum discussion group. Finally, in 2025, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast, and JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA at jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Jonathan Greenblatt is the CEO of the Anti Defamation League and its 6th national director. As chief executive of ADL, Jonathan leads all aspects of the world's leading anti-hate organization. He's an accomplished entrepreneur and innovative leader with deep experience in the private, public, and nonprofit sectors. Since becoming CEO in July 2015, Jonathan has modernized ADL while refocusing it on the mission it has had since its founding in 1913, to fight the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. In 2022, he released It Could Happen Here, a book that sounds an alarm, warning that hate and systemic violence is gathering momentum in the United States, and that violence on a more catastrophic scale could be just around the corner. Jonathan serves on numerous corporate and nonprofit boards and has been recognized on multiple occasions for his leadership at ADL. Most recently, he was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world of 2025. Jonathan Greenblatt, thank you very much for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
We are recording this on Monday, November 3rd, which is the day before Election Day in New York City. And of course, by the time this is released, we will know the results. But at the moment, Zohran Mamdani is widely expected to win the race for mayor. And that might be a good place, Jonathan, to open up, because a few days ago, a video from 2 years ago resurfaced in which Mamdani said, quote, "We have to make clear that when the boot of the NYPD is on your neck, it's been laced by the IDF. You then responded, there is a word for this kind of twisted fear-mongering and conspiratorial thinking, antisemitism. But Mamdani supporters are trying to argue that being anti-Israel or anti-Zionist does not make you anti-Semitic. So with that as an introduction to a very big subject, I have two questions. First, can you explain, because I think it would be instructive, why this is an anti-Semitic comment? And second, a much broader question, why is it wrong to decouple anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism?
Okay, well, Scott, it's a great question, a great place to start. And it's a sort of a dense place to start, lay a foundation, not just for our conversation, but I think for where we are as a community and as a country in this moment. Our community here in the United States, it's facing the potential outcome that you alluded to, or you mentioned, where we are as a country in America today, and where we are as not just an American Jewish community, but as Klal Yisrael, right? As all of us. So, first of all, let's just get on the same page about what Zionism is so that we can then talk about what anti-Zionism is. And it is ironic in some ways we even have to have this conversation because Zionism is a word that, while not well understood, goes to the very heart of what it means to be a Jew from Judea, right? So if I look at almost any of the books behind you, or if I go to any of the synagogues, or sit with any of the minyanim anywhere on earth, there's a reason why they all pray in one direction, the direction to the pointed toward where you are sitting in Eretz Yisrael. And if I open up any siddur in any synagogue of any denomination, again, anywhere on earth, at every page you flip, it talks about returning to Yerushalayim or Zion or Yisrael. That is because the Jewish longing to return to our ancestral homeland didn't start with Zohran Mamdani. Frankly, it didn't start with David Ben-Gurion. It didn't start with Theodore Herzl in 1897. It started with Moshe Rabbeinu. So Zionism, the idea that the Jews have a connection in part to this place, a physical place from which we are from, is not, again, some new political convention. It is a covenantal commitment that's thousands of years old. You cannot take the Zion, if you will, out of what it means to be Jewish. Just like you cannot take the Jew out of being Jewish. Like there are uncomfortable things called facts, and the fact of the matter is that we are not just the people of the book, we are the people of a place. That is the place from where you are sitting right now. So with that understanding, political Zionism, which manifested in some ways in 1897 with their Judenstaat, that's about saying that the Jews have the, quote, right to self-determination in their ancestral homeland. That's it. Says nothing about Palestinians, says nothing about politics, says nothing about anything else, just saying we have a right to go back to the place where we're from. That's all. By the way, self-determination is, I think one could say, one of these inalienable human rights that's been attributed to individuals and to mankind since not just the creation of the nation state, but before that, since the Enlightenment. And you can find it in the Founding Fathers Declaration of this country that all of us are guaranteed with certain inalienable rights. Life, liberty, to live to be where you want to be with freedom. That is, again, at the heart of Zionism. And so Zionism is a uniquely Jewish idea, but I think no one would dispute the right of French people to self-determine their destiny. No one would determine the Palestinians, right? So the political concept we call Zionism is what I said. The right determination, it's a movement. By the way, it's a liberation movement. It's an anti-colonial movement. It's a de-settlement movement. So anti-Zionism needs to be understood as what it is. It is very simple. Whereas Zionism is this political concept, anti-Zionism is also political commitment, that Jews do not have that right. Anti-Zionism is not some abstraction. It is not some theory. It is a commitment. It is a commitment that Jews do not have the right we would guarantee to everyone else. So let me be clear. If you are an anarchist who doesn't believe in the notion of the nation state, I suppose there are those people, they're not hanging out with me at ADL or anywhere else that I know. Or if you're a political science professor, Scott, in delivering a symposium or seminar at some higher ed institution talking about theories of nationalism, okay, and you don't believe in nationalism at all, okay. But the anti-Zionist only believes that the Jews, singularly, uniquely, the Jews don't have the right to self-determination. That's what anti-Zionism means. It is a negation of our basic right. And it is clever in that its construct is not just a negation of the political idea, although it is that, it is a negation of our peoplehood, our identity. As I said, since Zionism is fundamental and indivisible from our fabric as Jews. By the way, whether you're a Satmar who doesn't believe in the political legitimacy of the state of Israel, Medinat Yisrael, or you are, a ferocious, Jabotinskyite, the truth is that even the Satmar would not dispute that the Jews have the right to self-determination. They just don't think we have reached the point where that right should be exercised, if you will. So I say all this because understanding that anti-Zionism is literally nihilism encoded in a slogan directed at our community allows you to see when someone says that I'm an anti-Zionist, what they're really saying is I am opposed to Judaism in its millennial form, in its core essential belief. So whether you are a Ugandan Muslim political candidate, your nationality and your religion and your political status have nothing to do with the fact that your anti-Zionism makes you a problem. Just like if you're a Jew from Park Slope who says, I'm an anti-Zionist. And this is something we need to grapple with. We as a people, how can it be that there are those in our midst who pray to this golden calf of anti-Zionism? How can it be that in our midst we have so failed that people somehow think Zionism is some necktie you can wear or not wear? Is some accessory you could say. There's this new movement I'm hearing about. I was just reading a piece of the New York Times, which is basically does everything it can to drive this narrative, whether or not it's true. Someone was saying, I'm a diasporist Jew. Okay. If you are a Jew, living in diaspora may be a choice you are making, like me. But that does not for any reason whatsoever imply that I am not committed to this fundamental tenet of my faith, which is an ultimate return to Zion. So you cannot be diasporism is not a thing. Diasporism is a temporary condition. It is not a permanent status. So that is why when you make conspiratorial claims like the boot of a police officer is laced by the IDF, let me tell you something. There's not a single, and I can say this with authority, there is not a single NYPD division, not a single NYPD officer that in their official status has ever done a training in the West Bank or anywhere else with the idea. They may have had meetings with the Israel National Police. That's possible. That's possible. But they do not train with the Israel Defense Forces. But you see, here's the thing, the sleight of hand that Zohran Mamdani has perpetrated since his days as an SJP organizer to today as a mayoral candidate, implying, suggesting, like painting a picture that plays into these conspiracies about Jews in power or about Jews in dual loyalty or about Jews control. And I think it is shocking that we're in a position where someone of those conspiratorial mindsets could actually be on path to potentially run the city in the world with the largest Jewish population.
Okay, that's very important to know. And of course, let me preface my next point, and I'm not done talking about Zohran Mamdani either, but I want to first nail down one particular idea. I'm obviously on the same page as you are, but I want to play a bit of devil's advocate just to understand better. What makes the Jewish people per se deserving of a land? Let me give you an example of what I mean. 3,500 years ago, Aryan peoples from Iran invaded, so to speak, 3,500 years ago, whatever that meant, the Indian subcontinent. And today, that is largely how the Indian people came to be, the combination of Aryans and the natives there. Let's say, for example, some people say, I'm an Aryan and now I want to go back to Iran and take over Iran because that's my homeland. That was 3,500 years ago. We might say, well, that's too long ago, or you're not the same original people, or you don't have those original beliefs. What is it about the Jewish people per se that makes our belief that we are deserving of the land of Israel, which of course I share? What is it that makes that actually, so to speak, legally binding, that people should care? Meaning, my belief is my belief. Why should someone else care what my belief is? He can say, you can believe whatever you want. I don't have to assent to that belief. Is it a genetic thing? Is it a racial thing? Is it a religious thing?
So a few things. Number one, I'll just say, I should have said this before, I will say this now, Scott, so you hear it clearly and unambiguously. People can elect whoever they want in the mayoral election in every race. We're a 501c3 organization, which means vis-a-vis the tax laws of the United States, we don't get involved in partisan activities. So pointing out the problems that I have with a particular mayoral candidate's position as it relates to our people does not signify an endorsement for any of his opponents. People vote wherever I want. It's not for me to tell them to vote or not to vote for. So I think that's important because I don't want people to say, oh, Jonathan Greenblatt is saying I should vote for blank. I'm not saying that, but I'm explaining why when you make these comments, what they're rooted in and why it is so dangerous, so combustible, so adversarial to our community. That being said, to the question of self-determination, I can't speak anything to the Persians invading the Indian subcontinent. But what I will comment on is something maybe a little bit more contemporary, which are Native American people or indigenous people who are identified as indigenous to this place, North America, where I live, and in north of the border of Canada, called First Nations. Here we refer to this group of peoples, these tribal communities, as Native Americans. So I don't know if there's anyone literally who would say that they don't have the right to self-determination. I think it's sort of, as Steven Pinker would say, common knowledge that they have the right to self-determination. The way that is sort of effectuated today, circa 2025, is they have reservations, and they have tribal law that dictates how things happen on those reservations. One might say, well, don't they have the right to all the land that was once theirs? There's an arrangement. There's a sort of a modicum of understanding that's been reached, whether we think it's fair or unfair, where they do have the right to self-determination in their place, and they have their own laws that preside in that place, and we have to abide by them. Well, what if I want more land, or what if I think they had a broader claim? That could certainly be litigated, if you will. That can be argued. That can be contested. But no one would dispute their rights of petition. I'll give you another example. Kurdish people. So Kurdish people live between Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey. And I think there's a general consensus, unless you're in Erdogan's government, that they should have some degree of self-determination. What Kurdistan is and its borders, its parameters, I think that is sort of a subject for debate. There is now a Kurdish region in Iraq that is semi-autonomous. That may be, what it is going forward. But I think everyone agrees, even if you don't think they should overturn the Turkish government, that they do, and that the terrorist activities in pursuit of that, like the old PKK, like you think they're a problem, and yet no one would disagree with the fact that they had the right to self-determination as a Kurdish people with an indigenous connection to that place that they've had for thousands of years. So why the Jews? What makes the Jews different? Well, I think, first of all, before you get to the legal, it's moral. There's a moral commitment to the Jewish people. Why? Because it's an indisputable fact, as evidenced, as I said at the top, by not just what's in our Torah, but what's in the holy books of the other large monotheistic faiths. And there is an avalanche of historical evidence which proves the lineage and connection of this Judean people to the place we call Judea, that is now referred to in a parlance as Israel, the state of Israel. Secondly, there's a legal commitment. It's called the United Nations. This has already been asked and answered because the United Nations, after a process, agreed. And the United Nations, whether you like it or don't like it, it voted on and agreed to apportion land to the Jewish community who was living there and to the Arab community who was living there. Now, it may very well be that the Arabs did not accept the legitimacy of the declaration, but everybody else did. And so facts, again, are difficult things to dispute. It happened. It's real. They have the right to the land, period. And a follow-up thing that happened is those Arabs who lived there didn't agree with it, and the neighboring countries attacked again and again and again. So the Israelis, as a state declared by the United Nations, have the right to respond, to repel, and that's what they've done. So I think there is a moral commitment to the Jewish people based on history, and then there is a legal commitment to the Jewish people based on the United Nations partition. I guess I'd say one last thing. One of the claims of the anti-Zionists, whatever their ilk, whether they are Jewish, non-Jewish, whatever, is, well, we don't believe in ethnocentrism. We don't believe in, a Jewish nation state. I mean, this is, again, the biggest fraud of them all and the most easily disproven, Scott, because if you didn't believe that the nation of Pakistan doesn't have the right to exist, as well as the nation of Great Britain with the cross on the flag, if you felt that none of those countries had the right to exist, then I wouldn't have a problem when you say that you have issues with Israel. But it is the moral selectivity. It is the moral incoherence that I have a problem with. Because as Natan Sharansky famously said, the 3D test, do you demonize Israelis and the state? Do you delegitimize it and its right to exist? And then you hold it to double standards. And I think anti-Zionism as this nihilist ideology specializes in and has perfected the double standard. Literally, this is their singular contribution to the public conversation in these last 70, 75 to 80 years. It is the double standard. I want for you, but not for me. And it's really quite incredible. And I think it's not only morally specious, it is deeply dangerous, because when we try to understand not just the attacks on Israel from the day the state was founded to the murderous barbarism of October the 7th, it is rooted in this nihilistic refusal to accept the right of a people to exist. And that I find, on their own terms, the right to self-determination that they want for everybody else. And that I find just so duplicitous and despicable.
I'm fully in agreement. And you answered a lot of questions, which I appreciate. I'd like to continue with Mamdani just for another moment. Again, given the caveat you said before that you're not endorsing any given candidate, but I'm curious about what New Yorkers, and I'm saying this as someone who lives in Israel, what New Yorkers in particular are actually afraid of. What I mean by that is, if I were to look at this outside as I am, I would say that in all likelihood, and I'd like to know if you agree with me or disagree with me, part of the problem with Mamdani's election or potential election is that anti-Semitic beliefs, speech, and actions among the general public will have been normalized to an even greater degree. Mm-hmm. Second, that anti-Zionism will be decoupled from anti-Semitism to an unacceptable degree. Mm-hmm. And third, and this is the part that might be more contentious, I would think that he wouldn't use the police in any negative way towards the Jewish community. In fact, my guess, without knowing anything, is that he'll be careful to guard synagogues just as much as they've been guarded until now in order to show that he's not an anti-Semite, only an anti-Zionist. And therefore, on a practical, on-the-ground level, even though the first two things are very serious, the third thing is not necessarily a danger. Do you think I'm right, or do you think the third thing is also incorrect, and actually it will be more dangerous for Jews on a practical level?
So there's a lot to unpack in your question. But first of all, I just want to make sure that the audience is clear. Anti-Zionism is just Jew hatred packaged in the sort of jargon of our current moment. Really, after, and I can say this with a historical view. So the hatred of Jewish people started thousands of years ago when we didn't accept Christ, quote unquote, as our savior. And the Romans hated the Jews because they hated a lot of the different tribes. But the early Christians really hated the Jews because our failure to accept Jesus as the savior so invalidated this new religion. Why were these people clinging to the old ways? And so if you look back over history, the first manifestations of the hatred of Jewish people was really cloaked in this anti-Judaism, this view that the Jewish faith was not legitimate, that the Jews missed the boat on Christ and then Muhammad, that the Jews, again, was an illegitimate faith, that they were trying to influence things, that they weren't loyal to where they were, et cetera, et cetera. And that led to, by the way, it led to crusades. It led to Arabian slaughter by, the early followers of Muhammad and his sons and his disciples. It led to inquisitions. It led to forced conversions. It led to massive expulsions. It led to persecution and death. And then as you move through time, as you had the dawn of the age of reason and the Enlightenment, the realization that maybe the sun doesn't revolve around the earth, that maybe the world isn't flat, and the scientific revolution emerged, the notion came to pass that, maybe there isn't really a God and it's a science-based world we're living in. And so we don't have a problem with the Jews based on their faith. But then it became, we have a problem with the Jews based on their race. And you had a sort of racialized anti-Semitic hatred of Jews versus a faith-based one. And in that racialized view, you had this fake science of eugenics, and you had this notion that the Jews were a Semitic people, which is why the term anti-Semitism itself was coined. It was coined in the mid-1800s in Austria to put like a scientific sheen on Jew hatred. No, we don't hate the Jews for their faith, but anti-Semitism is a legitimate bias against this racially inferior people. And of course, that led to the Holocaust and the Shoah. And so after the Shoah, when people saw the kind of moral degradation and the slaughter that it enabled, then it became, eugenics is a fake science. Of course, Black people and Jewish people are not really different races, and we're all the same, regardless of how we look. So we don't hate the Jews because of their faith, and we don't hate the Jews because of their race. But then it became, we hate the Jews because of their state. And so whereas anti-Zionism was a term of art from the mid-19th century on to kind of explain hatred of Jewish people in a racialized way, so anti-Zionism is a term of art to explain hatred of Jews in a politically feasible or politically palatable way. It's the same thing. What do they say? Old wine in new bottles. That's all important, just as background to realize you cannot disentangle anti-Zionism from anti-Semitism. And again, I don't need someone whose highest achievement in life as being getting an undergraduate degree from Bowdoin College in Maine to tell me about especially if we just read Lech Lecha, like we just read the Parsha where the covenant is introduced between God and Abraham. I really don't need anyone to tell me about my covenant with God and about my identity and about what Zionism means, not just to me as a Jew, but to, again, Klal Yisrael. Now that I've said that.
That was a good overview.
So what does it mean? I mean, look, we are worried about the notion that the new mayor can, with their hands on the levers, do a lot of things. Number one, who do you appoint to office? Do you appoint extremists around you? People who, again, reinforce anti-Semitic stereotypes, who say defamatory things about Jews, even if they try to dress it up? That's a problem. So who do you place around you as your advisors? Number two, who do you place in key roles? Think chancellor of our school system. Think commissioner of the NYPD. Think people responsible for like pension, the city pensions, and people responsible for purchasing and whatnot. I mean, again, there are ways you can press buttons depending on what role you play that can have a great impact on us. So schools, let's say the new chancellor of schools decides we're going to take out Holocaust education, or we're going to change Holocaust education. So now it's all about genocide. And we're going to politicize it by saying, instead of looking at the facts, we're going to talk about the so-called genocide in Gaza and make that the lead issue for students to learn about. Or you could, again, the NYPD could say, we are going to provide police protection for some synagogues, but maybe not for others that have Israeli flags, because that's a political statement. Or the person who's responsible for the pension, say, we're going to divest from countries that engage in human rights violations. Oh, sorry, did I mean China? No, I didn't mean that. Oh, do you think I meant India? No, I don't mean that. I mean Israel. And that's the only thing they're going to do, Israel. Or someone who makes purchasing decisions. So, the city is not going to work with small business anymore unless they adopt our definition of anti-Semitism, which doesn't include the way it shows up in people's lives. Or just say, we quietly cut off Jewish-owned businesses. That could happen too. So you could see this manifest in lots of ways. And then beyond the appointments, beyond the actions they take, the environment matters, Scott. The atmosphere matters. I want you to imagine a world in which, in the proverbial and literal faculty lounge, the teachers are like, what? We got a new mayor. Why do we need to take, what from these Jews? Or imagine a world in which city employees say, what? Why do I need to hire people with Jewish last names and create trouble for myself because of the new administration? By the way, the ADL is a very data-driven empirical organization. We ground all of our work in research, all of it. And we did a study, I think it was last year, looking at bias and discrimination in labor markets. So we ran a test, basically, Scott, where we had people apply for jobs. I can't remember if it was off of Craigslist or Idealist or some other jobs site, but it was off a job site. They applied their resumes for white-collar jobs with a name that, let's say, sounded European and bland. And then they applied for the same job with a resume that sounded Jewish-sounding last name like Jonathan Greenblatt, and experiences that clearly identify them as a member of the Jewish community, maybe Jewish youth group, belong to a synagogue, something like that. And then we did a third set of resumes that sounded Israeli. When I say Israeli, I don't know if the name was Yitzhak Rabin, something that sounded like a classical cliche Israeli name.
Scott Kahn.
Could be. And then I think even less Anglo than Scott, right?
I would think so, yes.
Shmuley Khan or something,
Yeah.
And then it had Shmuley Kanan. And then it had activities that identified them as Israeli, whatever those were. So the same resume that you could get a response to if you had the bland control name, the Jewish name had to apply to get a callback 1.2, like 20% more times. And the Israeli name almost 1.4 something percent. So 40% more times. So again, the labor markets, if you have a Jewish sounding name in this test, 20%, you had to apply 20% more to get the same answer, and Israelis 40 some odd percent more. So what that tells us is that already in a pre-Mamdani, if you will, environment, Jews and Israelis have a harder time. Now that shouldn't maybe surprise us, because that's why ADL was founded 112 years ago. There's always been discrimination against Jews. We're here to fight it. We're here to protect the Jewish people. But what we worry about, as we've seen anti-Semitic incidents rise, kinetic, violent acts, I am concerned that, and I call that abrasive anti-Semitism. I'm very concerned about what I'll call erasive anti-Semitism. And again, the abrasive anti-Semitism you can measure and see and feel. It's a guy going to a synagogue in Pittsburgh and shooting 11 people on a Shabbat morning. It's a podcast host platforming a disgusting neo-Nazi, and the two of them doing what they do in public for everyone to hear. The erasive anti-Semitism isn't in your face. It's the resume that doesn't get a return phone call. It's the person who doesn't get asked, who doesn't get a promotion. It's the Jewish business that doesn't get an opportunity when they apply for the RFP, just doesn't get considered. So erasive anti-Semitism is much harder to measure, but it is equally pernicious as the abrasive anti-Semitism, which is so in our face.
And I would suggest that the erasive anti-Semitism also is handicapped in terms of determining that it exists by the relative success of the Jewish community. If you told somebody the Jews aren't given the same opportunities, people may very well laugh in your face. What do you mean? Jews are so successful. Jews are rich, which itself may be a form of anti-Semitism. But in spite of that, the fact that Jews are seen to be quite successful, broadly speaking, might make it more difficult to argue, how dare you hurt the Jewish community? He says, no one's being hurt. You guys are hurting us.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. One of the claims you hear that the kind of Mehdi Hassan crowd likes to say is, oh, Israel's complaining. It's the superpower. It's the this, it's the that. And I find that really quite offensive, irrespective of Israel's prominence and its success. That doesn't prevent the country from being besieged literally and again, figuratively by its neighbors and its opponents, across the region around the world. And the same thing for the Jew, not just the Jewish state, but the Jewish people. Though it's certainly true that some Jews have been very successful. And there are many people in public life who we can identify as Jewish who again have had great success. That doesn't mean they haven't faced discrimination. That doesn't mean they haven't faced considerable hardship. And that doesn't mean they haven't overcome them, So I just think, someone making that claim say, oh, but what's the counterfactual? I mean, I know the lived experience of Jewish people. And again, the data bears out the fact that there was a recent study, I think this was either ADL or the Washington Post, I can't remember which, but found that something like 45, I think, percent of Jews stated that they are hiding their identity in public. There's often, I think, a habit where Orthodox people, they're called the modern Orthodox people. I don't want to categorize you, but people who are not black hat but identify as Orthodox and wear a kippah will wear a hat outside. Like that is
a baseball hat you're referring to.
Yeah, sorry, like a baseball cap or some other way so that the kippah isn't visible. But what I'm talking about are people like changing the names in their like Uber apps so they don't sound Jewish, or taking off their pins, or not wearing a Jewish star anymore, or removing their mezuzah, or changing their name not just in their Uber app so the driver doesn't detect it or think that they're Jewish, but renaming it all together, Scott. We're seeing lots of these kinds of behaviors, and the data bears out that Jews are afraid today for a very real reason and taking real steps.
I don't want to harp on this for too long because I do want to move on, but I have one last question, and I just like a quick answer for this one. What would you say when someone would say, well, you're right, I can't determine what Jews believe, but there's someone like Peter Beinart, who basically is an anti-Zionist, and he seems to decouple anti-Semitism from anti-Zionism. You have an actor like Mandy Patinkin, who seems to have no problem with Zohran Mamdani's anti-Zionism. He's openly supporting him and encouraging people to vote for him. So those Jews seem to be okay with it. They're Jewish. How would you answer that?
Look, I mean, I think we are not a monolithic people. Mandy Patinkin, who I don't know, Peter Beinart, who I do know. And by the way, Peter is Shomer, Shabbos. Peter lays tefillin every day. Peter, I think, is doing the Daf Yomi. Peter is very committed, Jewishly, and lives by halakha. And yet, his anti-Zionism, I think, is it's terrible, and it's corrosive. And I don't dispute his commitment to our faith, but I think his anti-Zionism undermines it. Now, look, for a lot of people, I believe that they say, well, and Peter's a very thoughtful guy, very thoughtful. I just strongly disagree with him based on the facts. I think Peter would, and like a lot of people would say that, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been in power for a long time. This policy of state of Israel that he has propounded are inimical to like a peace process, Like, that's fine. You can have very strong views about Bibi Netanyahu. Like many people have very strong views about Donald Trump, like they had strong views about Joe Biden. But it doesn't mean you somehow believe that Americans have the right to exist and that you are committed to the enterprise of dismantling it. See, that's the other thing. We talk about these things often in the abstract, but there's nothing abstract about anti-Zionism. So again, I understand that as a theoretical concept, like I said, like in a college seminar, okay. But in the real world, the world where I live, where Jews are getting beaten up in Brooklyn, where Jewish college students are being not just marginalized, but maligned, where Jewish professionals are being, as I said, experiencing discrimination, where we see Jewish elderly marchers getting firebombed in Boulder, or Jewish young people getting shot walking out of a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C., or an elected official has his house burned down because of his quote unquote policies on Palestine, of which he has none, by the way. So all of this, I think, reflects the fact that anti-Zionism, even if you'd like to think you can keep it in the lab, it eventually breaks out of the lab and shows up in the real world and causes very real damage. Now, it doesn't matter if the person suggesting it's permissible is Jewish, whether they're Orthodox, whether they're whatever. Like, the fact of the matter is, again, as a political enterprise, anti-Zionism is a commitment to deny Jews basic fundamental human rights that those same people typically accord to everyone else. And so what I find most depressing, Scott, is the moral incoherence that these people typically possess. I think they can do better, they should do better, but their religion doesn't exempt them from having, again, moral coherence, moral clarity. The last thing I'll say is that the one thing that anti-Zionists do very, very well, other than lie and self-deny, they get a lot of attention. They have managed to master the art of attention because they speak in slogans. They kind of live with memes. They lead, with memes. And while that is effective, that doesn't mean it makes them right. And so if you were to actually ask Jewish people, we've done the polling. Like I said, we're very data driven. 90+% of American Jews have a deep personal connection to the state of Israel. I think the number even higher, about the percent of American Jews who think that it has the right to exist. If American Jews really knew what anti-Zionism was, if they really understood it, I think they would almost universally be opposed to it, whether they're a Hollywood celebrity or Broadway actor. And frankly, I'll just say again, sorry, this is fine. This is truly the last thing. Like, who cares what a Broadway actor says? I go to shul on a Saturday not to hear him, but for my personal commitment with God. So he's entitled to his views and his beliefs. But the idea that they're going to influence what I do to who I vote for, I think is nuts. And again, I say that across the board, whether you're a country music singer or a Broadway celebrity or a stand-up comedian, like at the end of the day, I think, again, we have this covenantal relationship. And I think it's up to us to have fidelity to that covenant and to make decisions for ourselves based on a personal relationship with it.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'd like to move forward from Israel to some other issues. You just mentioned some of the college campuses, and this may be unanswerable, but of course we've seen the tent cities and the tremendous anti-Semitism that has risen on college campuses, in particular since October 7th, 2023. And let's take the example of Liz McGill of Penn, the president or the former president of Penn, who was grilled in, I think it was December of 2023, by Congresswoman Elise Stefanik in a congressional hearing. And she asked her this exact question: does calling for the genocide of Jews violate Penn's rules or code of conduct? Now, admittedly, the president of Penn might have been caught unawares, but she did pause and said, quote, "If the speech turns into conduct, it can be harassment, yes." And then upon further questioning, she said, "It is a context-dependent decision, Congresswoman." Now, everything I know about this particular person, Liz McGill of Penn, is that she's not an anti-Semite. She's clearly not an anti-Semite. And yet, it seems to be that only with regard to Jews do people have this hedge, this need to say it's based on the context. To put it in very unfair terms, if someone would call for the enslavement of different people, it would be unthinkable that someone would say that is only harassment given the context. Why is it that non-anti-Semites, people who may even be philo-Semitic for all I know, seem to have this blind spot and inability to call a spade when questioned about Jewish genocide? Or is that simply unanswerable?
No, I know it's no question's unanswerable. I may have the wrong answer, right? But not unanswerable. Few things. So I think, first of all, Liz McGill, she's a good person. She's not a bad person. I know her. She's super smart. She's thoughtful. She was the former dean of Stanford Law School. But I think on this issue, she was profoundly wrong, like wrong on the facts, but also wrong on the kind of moral essence of the question. So how does that happen? I think these campuses are captured. They've been captured over a long period of time, and it was sort of a quiet capture. But they've been seized by this oppressor-oppressed kind of ideology, which sorts people into camps. Either you are an oppressor or the oppressed. And Jews, I mean, first of all, I don't even agree with that schematic. But that being said, Jews are always put in the oppressor category because we are perceived as white, even though we're not. Because we're perceived as privileged, even though we're all not. Because we're perceived as having money, even though we all don't. Because we're perceived as being part of the elite structure, even though we're certainly not all. Nonetheless, like in this great sorting, we're up here. And so Liz inherited a campus, which she took over a few months before that hearing, maybe 6 months before that hearing, that was sort of bound up in this crazy, very twisted paradigm. And so what she was expressing there, I think, was a reflection of the predominance of that prevailing thought, that it can't be harmful if the group being offended has power. Now, again, I dispute the fact that all Jews have power. That's just factually untrue. But that was, I think, the belief. She subscribed to it. And so she was willing to tolerate bias and bigotry directed at Jews in a way you definitely wouldn't against other groups, other minority groups. Again, that's all come out in the wash. I mean, Liz is gone.
She's just one example of many, of course.
I was going to say, she's gone, and there's a new person at Penn, like there is at Harvard, like there's at Columbia, like there is at so many of these institutions. UCLA is another one. Northwestern is another one. Michigan is another one. It's happening now at it's happening at GW, I think, or Emory, all over. So what does that tell us? I think we really got to hit sort of the reset button. And Congresswoman Stefanik had it right when she pressed and pressed and pressed her. This isn't hard. It's not context dependent whether calling the genocide of people is right or wrong. Now, I will say, at ADL, we've always tended to err on the side of free speech. Like, I don't believe in hate speech. Like, I don't believe you can ban hate speech. Like, hate speech is the price of free speech. They should call it hard speech. Like, there's easy speech and hard speech. And hearing things you don't like, that's the price of free speech. But let me say something. Like, choosing who you put on your podcast and who you don't include on the podcast. If you don't include me, that isn't canceling me. You're just deciding not to platform me. And so when iHeartRadio or whomever platforms Tucker Carlson, they're making a decision. When Tucker Carlson platforms Nick Fuentes, he's making a decision. When Kevin Roberts defends all that, he's making a decision. And so it's not canceling to say, I don't want to hear odious views. It isn't. It's making a decision. So I say that because that's right in all sort of realms of life. As it relates to the campus, where we have young people who need to be kept not intellectually safe. I don't believe in that. Again, hate speech or hard speech is the price of free speech, and it's what you want. But we should also have, again, like the honesty to acknowledge when something isn't actually even hate speech. It's like a direct threat. And so saying something in a vacuum is one thing. On the heels of Jews being raped, butchered, and slaughtered at scale, to stand in front of the Hillel when Jews are walking in to pray on a Saturday morning, probably more likely at the Chabad, or when Jewish people are walking into a Shabbat service on Friday night and screaming at them about the river and the sea and whatever, that crosses a line, clearly crosses a line. And even if they're not walking into like a Jewish worship space, an environment where Jews are being looking at these images on their phone of their cousins, right, or their counterparts, again, being raped, mutilated, and slaughtered, to make comments that encourage that rape, that mutilation, that slaughter is inexcusable. So I don't think it's context dependent at all. And I think some contexts make it even more clear than others. But moral clarity requires us to make the hard calls even when we don't want to. So again, I don't say ban speech. If people want to say it, a river to the sea, that's fine. Let them say it over there in a corner, far, far away, where the Jewish kids and the rest of the campus isn't exposed to it. Like, that's one way to handle it. Liz didn't do that. And we know how that worked out.
You just mentioned Jonathan, Tucker Carlson, and Nick Fuentes, and that leads to this larger question about anti-Semitism on the right. We've largely talked about Mamdani, who, of course, is on the left. And to me, Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes is less scary than the fact that the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, backed Tucker Carlson's interview with Nick Fuentes, an open anti-Semite and Holocaust denier. And in a similar vein, J.D. Vance was asked last week at the University of Mississippi, and this is the quote of a student there, "I'm a Christian man, and I'm just confused why there's this notion that we might owe Israel something, or that they're our greatest ally, or that we have to support this multi-hundred-billion-dollar foreign aid package to Israel. I'm just confused why this idea has come around, considering the fact that not only does their religion not agree with ours, but also openly supports the prosecution of ours." Forget the ignorance that's embedded in that statement. The problem was that J.D. Vance defended the administration not by saying your question is based on falsehood, but by saying, well, we only support Israel when it helps America. Basically, he allowed the assumptions in that ignorant statement to go unchallenged. Yeah. Perhaps because I don't know if he agrees with them or not. I don't know. But it's very, very scary to watch this anti-Semitism not just be platformed, but be mainstreamed from the far edges of the right into the mouth of the vice president. And even Senator Ted Cruz has been very vocal about how this is a major issue for the GOP. And I'm curious if you agree that it's a major problem and how we can fight it.
So a few things. So number one, I do think that in America, I'm not going to speak for Israel, and it sounds like you're originally from the United States. Is that
I'm from Boston? Yes.
So like, it is certainly true that our country has become so polarized, so kind of riven by partisanship, that everyone sees everything through a lens. Now, by the way, the phone contributes to that because literally that's where people get their news, and the algorithm feeds you based on who you are and what you read and what you like and what you frequent. So you're getting a warped view from the main way you're getting information, and then forget the news sources themselves are often very bad. I say that because this partisanship serves no one. And it's become very convenient for people on the left to say, oh, look at Trump and look at, I don't know, J.D. Vance and Tucker, they're the problem. And it's become very convenient for people on the right to say, oh, look at Mamdani, look at Rashida Tlaib, look at whatever, XYZ, they're the problem. Look, and the reality is neither side of the political spectrum is exempt from intolerance. Like how you vote doesn't somehow necessarily exempt you or exonerate you from holding prejudiced views. This is true across the board on everything, and it's particularly true on anti-Semitism. So yes, we talked earlier in this conversation about what I would characterize as like the radical left, and although we didn't deeply, like the interweaving and the fusion of like Marxism or socialism with white supremacist kind of ideology and nativism is deeply dangerous for us as Jews. And so the far corners of the radical left, again, folks like SJP, these weren't serious people. Now this guy could get elected mayor, or like communists and Trotskyites, and now one of them again could be mayor. Shows you how it moves from the fringes to the mainstream. And you have the same problem on the right. You have the same problem on the right with kind of Reupers, that's Nick Fuentes' group, or white supremacists or whatnot, like trying to move into the mainstream. And no one has trafficked this more than Tucker Carlson. I had been talking at it, and we at ADL have been talking about Tucker Carlson for years. Didn't just start last week, for years. And look, the truth is that ideas like the Great Replacement Theory, and now again, you can have strong views about immigration, but it's a fact. It's like an undeniable fact that the Great Replacement Theory comes out of a super hostile, bigoted, anti-Semitic kind of school of thought that Jews are manipulating immigration to flood the country with migrants so they can take control. Like that's where it comes from. So even if it gets watered down and people don't understand that when they talk about like, oh, they're flooding us, the country with immigrants to change things, it's rooted in an awful, absolutely violative kind of anti-Semitic school of thought. And so, yeah, there are problems on both sides. Yeah, we have to take it on from both sides. And ultimately, at ADL, as I kind of alluded to or kind of spoke about with respect to politics, but just more generally, let me tell you, Scott, the ADL, I don't care if the guy at the plate is wearing a red jersey or a blue jersey. What I care about, I'm the ump. I have the same strike zone, or I endeavor to, no matter who's standing at the plate. I call balls and strikes as it relates to the Jewish people. I don't know that we always get it right. Like an ump, we can miss a call or two, but that's what we're trying to do every day. And there are some people who say, whoa, your strike zone's too big when someone's wearing a blue jersey. And other people, whoa, your strike zone is too big when someone's wearing a red jersey. Like, we don't think that way. We're trying to call balls and strikes. So whether it's the president or the vice president, like what J.D. Vance said, I don't have the script in front of me, but I believe that the relationship between America and Israel is rooted in shared values. It is rooted in a common set of beliefs that are really embodied in the words of our founding fathers about what it means to be a democracy, again, and recognizing that people have certain inalienable rights. That's where it comes from. It's rooted in this Western tradition. And so I do not think the relationship between, now I could dispute something that J.D. Vance said about like hundreds of, or that you told me that he said. I haven't read what he said in front. But like, look, the quote unquote aid that goes from the United States to Israel, particularly the military aid, gets spent on, guess what? Goes from the United States to Israel to get spent back in America buying American munitions from American companies, creating American jobs. That being said, our relationship is not just a transactional one. Somebody who said that Israel was like an aircraft carrier that can't be sunk, like essentially of our military interests. Again, there could be a transactional reason, there could be a military strategic reason, but ultimately, I believe it's a values-based reason. We are both democracies. We both believe in the sanctity of individuals. We both believe in this view that we have, again, like a greater mission. And so there are aspects of Israel's like political economy that are different than America's political economy, but I think there is a shared fundamental basis that makes us stronger together, that supersedes a particular aid bill or supersedes a military rationale. You need that values basis to remain tight.
But what scares me, Jonathan, is the fact that Tucker Carlson, obviously he's problematic, but the person he was platforming was Nick Fuentes, who's young. And the person who was asking that question to J.D. Vance was a student at the University of Mississippi. And the people about whom Liz McGill was talking are these students. In other words, it seems to me, if I had to make an amateur line about who in the United States is more pro-Israel and who is less pro-Israel, or more specifically, who's more anti-Semitic and who's less anti-Semitic, the older generation, I would think, is more pro-Israel and less anti-Semitic. And the younger generation is where the problems are really arising, which makes me very nervous about what's going to happen in 10, 20, and 30 years when that younger generation takes over the two parties.
You should be nervous. You should be nervous. That is why we need to fight with everything we've got. And so I do think, by the way, the best person to fight back on the woke right, so to speak, is Ben Shapiro and his folks and his Congressman Randy Fine from Florida and his Senator David Cormier from Pennsylvania and his Senator Cruz from Texas. People on the right need to lead the fight against anti-Semitism on the right. And the best people to fight against Zohran Mamdani or the kind of radical left are people like Congressman Dan Goldman, who's from New York City, or Congressman Richie Torres, also from New York City, or Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania, or individuals who self-identify as being of the left. Like, the ADL's job, again, is balls and strikes. That's what we need to do. We need to be credible to both sides. It's not easy, but that's what we've got to do. But at the end of the day, when the right calls out the left, it falls on deaf ears. When the left calls out the right, it falls on deaf ears. What we need are both sides to wrestle with the challenges from within. And then what we need to do as a people is, again, reimagine the education piece for the next generation. And this is an important thing to talk about. Because you asked me earlier about Mandy Patinkin and Peter Beinart. Again, hard to square what's in their heads, so I'm not going to try. But I do think a world in which, if not a majority, a plurality of young Jewish New Yorkers are going to vote in this election for a candidate who is openly and casually anti-Zionist. And that's breathtaking to me. And it means to a degree that we in the Jewish community, we in the leadership, I should say, have failed. I think our Hebrew school system, which serves Reform and conservative Jews, has failed. I think our Jewish summer camps and our JCCs have failed. I think we have not done an effective job of ensuring that the next generation understands that tikkun olam is an attribute of, but not the entirety of, Judaism. Like, you need to understand Torah. You need to understand, again, as we talked about at the top, this covenantal dynamic that we have. Because it's being a chosen people doesn't mean he chose us. It means we chose sort of him. It's a commitment. It's an obligation. It's a responsibility. And, Hillel teaches us not just, if I'm not for my others, who am I for? But also, if I'm not for myself, who will be? To be for yourself means you need to know thyself. And I think, look, we've got real issues broadly with American young people who don't know how many amendments there are in the Constitution, or who don't know, how many states there are in the Union, or don't know, like, basic civics. That's a problem. But the more powerful problem is that in a country like this, it is easy to assimilate and to secularize. And as Jews, we simply cannot afford to abandon this millennial covenantal responsibility that we have been shouldered with and that we have accepted. And when we fail to teach our children, again, that Judaism doesn't start with, marching. It starts with davening. And so, look, I'm not so religious, and I'm not trying to come off as sanctimonious. But I think if we lose Torah, we lose everything. And if we lose Torah literacy, we lose everything. And if we have an inability to explain to our young people about what's the basis of our peoplehood, we lose everything. And I think we haven't done as well as we could. And that also means not just admitting where we get it right, but acknowledging where we get it wrong. Like, these young people from this group called If Not Now launched a campaign a few years ago. It was called You Never Told Us. And I remember. I think it is simple of the sickness that pervades them, that they went to like Jewish summer camps to try to like interrupt kids' summers and with their politics. Ugh, give me a break. But I do think that it is fair to say that we as Jews, and again, it's very Talmudic, like it's who we are, need to be willing to debate and dissent and to have those tough conversations. Sometimes I think we shut down those tough conversations. We don't know how to handle it. Like the Hebrew school teachers doesn't want to talk about Israel because they're afraid of being criticized. And sometimes, again, the criticism comes from within our own house. So I think we need to be willing to tolerate debate, willing to tolerate dissent, just do it with guardrails. So again, you want to debate positive Israel, go for it. You want to debate, what Abraham meant when he told God to sacrifice Isaac, go for it. You want to debate how to show up effectively when the laws of kashrut are so difficult to uphold, go for it. Like, that's good. You just need to have some reasonable guardrails to say, like, I don't want to say self-preservation because that sounds, it sounds too bland, but like literally, like our sanctity as human beings shouldn't be defiled, and the things that endanger us should not be normalized. We owe that not to our ancestors who came before us, but to our descendants who are yet to come. So within boundaries, within guardrails, everything should be debated. And we as a Jewish community should acknowledge that. We should endorse that. We should encourage that. So our young people can inherit this Talmudic tradition and be as strong and as Torah as we need them to be to face the challenges that lie ahead. Because the challenges that lie ahead are very real. Like Scott, again, in a world that's mediated by social media, in a world where, again, everyone is fighting with each other, in a world where there's so much deprivation, it is harder in many ways than it's ever been. It's easier and it's harder. So in a world where it is hard, we need to make it easy. And we make it easy by having that moral clarity. And that moral clarity compels us as Jews to remind our kids and to remind their descendants that it starts with Torah, have that basis, understand it in all its dimensionality, endeavor to debate the issues around it. And then I think we prepare our kids for the world that comes.
That's a very important point. I also want to add, though, that the ADL itself sometimes comes under fire because people don't acknowledge or agree that you're calling balls and strikes.
All the time.
People on both sides of the aisle say you're one or the other. For example, I know the ADL has a program called No Place for Hate, and the National Education Association, which is the largest teachers union in the United States, voted in a non-binding resolution, which was overturned by the executive committee, but it voted, I believe, this past July to stop working with the ADL altogether. And similarly, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, said that the ADL is essentially spying on Americans, whatever that means. I want to know how the ADL deals with issues like this.
Terrorist organizations. They were domestic terrorist organizations because James Comey gave a speech, at ADL in 2014. Look, we get criticized every day, Scott. We are criticized by folks on the left who say we are anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, who say we are whatever, MAGA apologists. We are not anti-Muslim. We are not anti-Palestinian. We are not MAGA apologists. But that's what I hear from people on the left. I hear from people on the right say that we are woke, that we are pushing the oppressor-oppressed framework, that we are complicit in whatever. And that also is not true. So the NEA kind of attacked No Place for Hate from a left-focused frame. And then I've seen No Place for Hate attacked from a right, if you will, or conservative-focused frame. At the end of the day, this is our burden. We're far from perfect, but we put our heads down every day and have one core purpose in mind. The reason why we were created over 100 years ago. We weren't created in a political or partisan mindset. We weren't created in order to be the flavor of the month. We weren't created in some like fickle kind of way. We were created to fill a gap and to serve a core purpose, which is to protect the Jewish people. I will tell you, I get up every single day I put my head in the pillow every single night. And the thing I'm doing in between is thinking deeply and intensely about that task, which is to protect the Jewish people. It's hard. And I don't know that it's ever been more difficult because, again, the partisanship and the intensity is so ratcheted up and the threats are so real. And I worry about it all the time. Like, am I fulfilling my obligation? What is it, the Pirkei Avot says, you are not required, you probably know better than I am, I'm sure you do.
I assume you're saying it's not incumbent upon you to finish the job, but you're also not free to desist from it. Is that what you're referring to?
Exactly. I think about that all the time, but I also think about, like, are you even up to the job? And how can you do a better job of the job? So I think we all wrestle with that, every single person here, every single day.
Could you end with, maybe there's no such thing right now, but with a piece of good news, something that's hopeful, because we've talked a lot about what's so difficult. Maybe there's something hopeful you can share before we conclude.
There's so much to be hopeful for. Like, look, this is a difficult time, no doubt. And the stakes are high, no doubt. But Scott, you, Scott Kahn, are a miracle. A Jewish man living in Eretz Israel, thousands of years after the Romans enslaved us and expelled us. You're a miracle. The state of Israel is a miracle. This podcast is a miracle. The Jewish people are a miracle. Our survival, our success, our sovereignty, these are miracles. And we live with so much grace today. I mean, think about it. We live longer. We live healthier in many respects. We have more knowledge in many respects. And again, like I'm the grandson of a Holocaust survivor who was from Germany. And my grandfather really wouldn't talk about it, but he did with me once, like when I was in high school, for a kind of an interview we did. I interviewed him, with a tape recorder, for those in your audience who remember what those were. And I asked him, Poppy, did you ever think that you'd have grandchildren? When you were a young man my age, how old was I when I did this? Probably my sophomore, junior year. So I was probably 16, maybe. I was young for my age, so I was probably 16. I said, did you ever imagine that you would have like American grandchildren like me and my brother and my cousins and my grandfather? He was like, no, I never thought about it. If I did, I would have thought we'd be in Germany, because where else would we be? Where else would he be? That's what he said. Where else would we be? He was German. My great-grandfather fought in the First World War for Germany. Like, they were German. And my grandfather, like many Holocaust survivors, German Jews in particular, like lived with this awful duality. Like, he loved Germany. He thought it was the greatest country in the world. And he hated Germany because it murdered his entire family and literally annihilated their existence. And yet, so he was thankful to be in America, but Scott, he was German through and through. I think all things considered, he would have still been in Germany, and I would be in Germany, if you will. So anyways, he said, where else would we be? Where else would I be? Flash forward, I don't know, say 16 years later, I'm in Los Angeles. Now I'm married, and my first son has been born. And I'm in my in-laws' apartment. And they live like in a condo, they have a sunroom, it's very nice. And my son, who was less than a year old, was crawling on the floor. And I was with my father-in-law, who was from Iran. So my wife and her family are immigrants. They're not immigrants. They were refugees from Iran who lived through the Islamic Revolution, who lived through the Iran-Iraq War, who came here on the tail end of that, came to America. And my wife had to escape with a fake passport that said she was a Muslim. It said, you're Jewish on your passport. We're letting Jews leave. It's a long story. They had a lot of challenges getting to the United States. I'm with my father-in-law. He came to this country when he was in his early 50s. He's probably about my age, maybe a little bit younger. Doesn't speak great English. They live in a bit of a bubble in Los Angeles where there are a lot of Iranian Jews. Anyways, I say to him, my son is crawling. I say, Mansour Khan, can you believe, that's his name is Mansour, and Khan is like, sir. So Mansour Khan, can you believe you have this, you have an American grandson? He was the first grandson in the whole family. Isn't that amazing? And my father-in-law, did you ever think? And my father-in-law basically says, oh, no, thought. And he says, but if I thought about it, I guess I would think my grandson would have been in Iran. And then he said, where else would we be? And it hit me like a bolt of lightning, because the same phrase that my grandfather had used, literally the same phrase, more than a decade before. And by the way, just so we're clear, that's 20 years before I took this job. This happened in 2003, I think, 2003, 2004. So it's a long time ago. But my Jewish father-in-law from Iran, from the Middle East, said the same thing that my Jewish grandfather from Germany, from Europe, had said. Where else would we be? So it gives me great hope is Hineni, right? What gives me great hope is here I am, a miracle today as a Jewish man, a proud Jewish man, raising proud Jewish boys, proud Zionists in this time, in this place. That is a miracle. And so that gives me extraordinary hope. Look, and that's why I'm in this fight. I'm in this fight so that one day my grandchildren will be born wherever they want to be. Meaning, my kids could decide to stay in America. They could make Aliyah and move to Israel. They could go to some other place. I don't know. But I want my children to have the choice to choose, to select where they will raise their Jewish families. And God willing, in B'Yisrael Hashem, they will be raised here, close to me and my wife. But I mean it, so that would give me hope. You give me hope. This podcast gives me hope. Our people give me hope. The world gives me hope. So as much as there is pain and as much as there is risk, there's also so much purpose and there's so much to revel in, and I feel nothing but gratitude for that.
I really appreciate your ending on such a positive and hopeful note, and this has been a really interesting and enlightening conversation. I'm genuinely grateful for the work that you do and for talking with me today. So Jonathan Greenblatt, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure is really mine, Scott. Thank you for having me.
Before we sign off, a brief word of thanks. Several new listeners have joined our Patreon, and I'm genuinely grateful. You're not buying bonus episodes. You're underwriting the work, the research, editing, and the independence that lets us ask hard questions with respect and clarity. If today's conversation helped you think more carefully about Torah, community, and the world we inhabit, please consider becoming a patron. Even a small monthly contribution makes a real difference in keeping the Orthodox Conundrum going and accessible to everyone. The link is in the show notes. To those who have already joined, thank you. Your vote of confidence means more than you know. And to everyone else, I hope you'll consider joining us. Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Check out the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.